In the same hour, the declaration gathered on Nebuchadnezzar. He was shoved away from mortals. He was eating herbage like oxen, and his frame was wet from the night mist of the heavens until his hair grew like vulture's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. Daniel, chapter 4, verse 33. And welcome back. You have not seen our faces for a month or so, a little bit of time. We've been getting things together for the return of the show. Welcome back, everyone. As always, I am your host, Robert Solomon, and with me is Spider, and of course, our very own intern, Steven. Hello, gentlemen. How does it feel to be back from our little hiatus?
Much better.
Good.
It feels like getting comfy back in the seat once again.
It's been a minute since we've all been in our respective seats. But let's not waste any time. Let's not waste these people's money that they've paid to see us. The first thing I want to bring up before we jump into this is I would like to get into what our mission here is at this Uncanny Earth. For so many years, we provided you with fantastic and excellent content. We've done everything from travels to drinking to gaming. Now we have a website that you can all go to. We will be putting that in the link at the bottom there. I did not think to do that, but that's okay. That's okay. We're still going to get
I don't
to
want to
that.
interrupt because we had to talk about interrupting each other just a little bit ago. This
Just
is
a
the
bit
only
ago.
time I'm going to say that. But we are actually simulcasting to the website right now. If you go on the website, people can watch this there
Yeah.
without having to go to YouTube itself. So it's all fully
But
integrated, ready to go.
if you could still go to YouTube as well, that'd be fantastic.
Still good. Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're
I need them
watching it on the
watch hours.
website, it'll give us YouTube views. So
Right,
don't feel too
right.
bad, people. But definitely also go to the YouTube. There's plenty of other stuff there to watch.
So, in our quest to become the most uncanny of things, we sort of got burned out. There was a while there where all of us just felt burned out. Topics weren't flowing as freely as they should have. So we stepped back, took a look at ourselves, and said, hey, how can we make this thing go? Let's make this thing go, and let's make it go fast. So we have implemented a new structure. You're going to be still seeing us every week in each season. However, we're going to be also taking time off for a month or so just to regroup, get back together, and then come out with more content so we don't burn ourselves out again. However, we're going to provide you excellent content. Now, as you can see, our intro has in fact changed. It's not including the Spirits Club stuff. It's not including the Twitch stuff. All of that stuff is now at the website. We want to focus more on our Uncanny as we all come together as a collective. And you can also support each one of our endeavors. I have videos recorded for Robert the Theologian. So that's coming along very nicely. I just need the weather to be a little bit nicer because I would like to be able to go outside and do some filming as well. I think that would be very important. But tonight, we decided to get into... Oh, it was overly loud. Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember if we can adjust the volume on the... I don't think we can in the videos area. I noticed that too. I'll go back and adjust that. So next week, the volume will be a little bit less ear blasting because I was kind of taken by surprise by how long that
Yeah, I
was.
was too.
I put that together. So
I was about to take a nap. Yeah.
that's my bad for anybody who just
we got
has tinnitus now.
we got Spider to thank for blowing out people's eardrums. Hey, if we're gonna come back with a bang, we got to come back with a bang. Thank you so much, Real Queso. It is very much appreciated. Thank you so very much. We definitely appreciate it. So we decided tonight to focus on supernatural Bigfoot. Now, what we're going to be doing is each week, one of us will be bringing you a curated topic. We're going to be bringing it to you, and each one of us will act as a moderator per our topic of show. So tonight, I'll be playing moderator in a very excellent role. What was the redeem there? Do you know what that redeem was? Let me pull up my Twitch real quick because there was a redeem. Let me see what that was for. Mm-hmm. Okay, not to leave too much dead airtime, but yes, we took a little bit of time off. Oh, push-ups. I will get to those next time you come into stream. Instead of 10, I'll give you 20. I really don't do a lot of redeeming because I don't see them on this episode, but I promise you, I'll give you 20. Um, so what we have been doing lately is just trying to come together as a team and not as a separate entity trying to talk all at once, which is what we were doing for quite some time. And that's on all of us. I'm not throwing the blame on anybody. I'm not saying it's anybody's fault. We sat down, we had conversations, we had production meetings, and you're going to get what we have always been wanting to do. And that is bring you the best quality content that we can give you. So this is how it's going to work. At the start of every show, we're going to bring you a news article from around the world. I have picked out one that I find to be very fascinating, and I know my two co-hosts here, they'll probably agree with this, especially Spider. He's probably already read this. And then after that, we're going to go into the topic. If we run over a little bit, that's okay. If we're under a little bit, that's also okay. But our goal here is to provide you with the most uncanny content we possibly can. And I do want to give a big shout out to both my co-hosts because, it's tough dealing with me at some points of life. It happens. But it's tough dealing with them too. So, before we get it's not easy. However,
Anybody who knows me.
it's facts. However, we are all of one accord and one mind going into this. So let's go ahead and jump into this uncanny life. Now, this comes to us from the times of Israel. It's just something that I had pulled up, but you can find it on your news of choice. And this was released on April 1st, 2025. It's not a April Fool's joke, but a 3-year-old Israeli girl has found a scarab-shaped Canaanite amulet that dates back some 3,800 years ago at the site of Tel Azekah near Bet Shemesh, and that is what the Israeli Antiquities Authority announced on Tuesday. Zivnit Zan from Moshav Ramat Meir was hiking with her parents and 2 older sisters at the foot of a hill where the archaeological site stands when she picked up what appeared to be a small stone. We were walking along the path, then Ziv bent down, and out of all the stones around her, she picked up this particular stone. Omer Nitzan, Ziv's sister, said in a statement out by the IAA. When she rubbed it and removed the sand from it, we saw something was different about it. I called my parents to come see the beautiful stone, and we realized we had discovered an archaeological find. They immediately reported this to the Israeli Antiquities Authority, and they trace their amulet back to Egyptian times. So what we're seeing here is we're starting to see, as we're digging deeper, as we're moving dirt from different areas, we're starting to erode that, and we're coming to a point where we're starting to pick up history, and that's one of my favorite things. I've always wanted just to walk along and be like, oh, will you look at here? It looks like I found me a gold doubloon from the Phoenician dynasty, the Phoenician times. Because it is said that the Phoenicians came over here by boats, that, Amerigo Vespucci or Columbus wasn't the first to come to America. And I have theories on that we can get into another time. But the fact that they're finding these things is fascinating. And at the site where David killed Goliath, they find a Canaanite stone, because Canaan was very big after Cain slayed Abel. He went to found Canaan and grow that city into a vast empire that would end up worshiping different gods and be destroyed, and those gods would carry over Baal and Shemesh and all those other Canaanite deities, Molech and all that. Gentlemen, I'll start with the intern first. What are your thoughts on finding such a piece of history just while out for a hike?
See, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Is like I can't even imagine how crazy that would be. Like you're just walking down the street, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, that's a nice little rock there. That's a smooth rock. I'll pick that up." And then you don't like how. What if you don't even know what it is? What if you just think it's some random rock and you don't have the knowledge to decipher what it is, and then you keep it for like a decade, and then later on someone tells you, "Hey, that's like part of King Arthur's sword, right?" And you're like, no, that's awesome.
Spider, I'll ask you this: what do you think as we move further in our timeline, and they keep finding these artifacts at biblical sites? What do you think that does to the archaeological world as a whole? Does it upend it, or do they do their best to roll with it?
Well, I think, and I've said this before, we've had discussions like this before, that as much as I'm not a particularly religious person, I've always said that at least definitely the Old Testament has a lot of historical value. And I think there's a lot we could learn about the history of different things in it, despite how many writers might have been involved and might have changed some of the events or changed some of the names. But there's there's so much to find that can corroborate that, because I don't think they would have gone to all the trouble to write that just specifically as a religious text. I think it was meant to be historical at the same time. And if you use that in conjunction with various archaeological things, I think you'll find a lot more missing history that just got buried, because that whole area over there is so much sand and dirt and just it's been just covered up and covered up and covered up. We don't have a sense of scale like that here in the United States. It's real difficult for us to imagine something being buried like that, because we didn't have, as far as we know, we didn't have big sweeping civilizations of buildings and building projects here. We had the Native Americans and perhaps other uh, people had come over earlier than that that didn't build large structures and things like that. We have the mounds and we have various things like that, but we don't have like castles in Europe just stumbled over in somebody's backyard if you dig far enough. You don't have things beneath the sand in Egypt. We have arrowheads and things you can find. Like I found arrowheads as a kid once in a while, which was always neat, and that's always historical as well. But I think in a lot of those areas that relate to stories that have been around for so long, and biblical stories are some of the stories that have been here the longest and continually retold. I think you have to take that into account the more you keep digging, and then eventually you can get that to come together on some level.
Excellent. Thank you both for your responses. Let's get into this Bigfoot and UFO business. Now, I know a lot of my friends are Bigfoot researchers. They mostly stay on the side of it's a flesh and blood humanoid um, creature that's related to man. It's somehow man's ancient past, and they don't delve into the supernatural aspect of it, and that's okay. That's I think there's two sides of this. I think that there is the supernatural side, and then I think there is the anthem. Make sure I get this right. I'm not going to get it right. That's fine.
Anthropomorphical, I think.
Ah,
Anthropomorphic.
is it anthropomorphic? I was going to say
We all gave it a shot.
that's all right. Listen, that'll
That
be
was a
good
free
for
interruption.
that'll be good for the short. That'll be good for the short. But I think what that does is anthropology in and of itself. I think that a lot of folks gear onto that side of the Bigfoot eye, which is fine. They want things that are tangible. They want the whole, excuse me, there isn't, okay. But I like to look at the supernatural aspects of it. I like to look at if there's UFOs involved, lights, orbs, if there is a quietness in the forest, which happens frequently with Bigfoot. And many researchers will say that, the accounts that they witness are usually the forest getting really quiet, almost if something is coming down the pipeline, as it were. Now, February 6, 1974, in the mountains of Fayette County, Pennsylvania, which I have presented there a couple times, actually. It's about 3.5 hours away. It's on the eastern side of Pennsylvania. As many of you know, Pennsylvania is an elongated state. It's not a high state. So you're driving a lot and on the expressway and racking up those toll dollars because Pennsylvania loves to charge you out the rear end for tolls. Not the point. Anyway, a woman is busy watching television in her cabin. She's deep in the woods, into the mountains, and she hears her pop cans getting knocked over at night. She goes out to check what it is, sees a lumbering ape bipedal creature. She has her shotgun in hand, pulls it up, pulls the trigger, and a flash of light happens. And the creature is gone. No marks, no bloodstains, no issues. It didn't give the lady's name. However, Fayette County is kind of a hot spot in Pennsylvania for Bigfoot. I think anytime you have a wilderness, because now you're getting into the Allegheny Mountains, you are more likely to have these kinds of cases. You don't hear a lot about Bigfoot in big cities. To my knowledge, I don't know if there's any cases. If there are, by all means, to all my researchers and my friends who are into Bigfoot, please send us an email, thisuncanny@gmail.com. Let me know, and I'll bring it up on our next show. Now, UFO researcher Stan Gordon, he was also getting reports of mysterious sightings of UFOs, glowing objects, and other strange anomalies centered around sightings of Bigfoot. In Cincinnati, Ohio in 1973, Refa Hetfield and her daughter awoke to a bright light beaming down from a circular-shaped UFO. They tracked this beam of light and watched as two simian creatures headed towards the beam. The ship then took the creatures and departed from the area. So we have two tales, right? One of a lady firing into a Bigfoot and the Bigfoot absolutely just disappearing like it was an ethereal being. And then two, we have this incident in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1973 in which the UFO beam, the light came down and two creatures headed towards that beam. They take the creatures and head out. Stephen, I'll start with you first here. What are your thoughts on the old woman or the woman in Fayette County, Pennsylvania? The shotgun hits the creature disappears in a flash of light. There's no blood traces. There's no matted fur, nothing, just gone. What are your thoughts on what you think this could be? Do you think the lady was maybe hitting the shine? What are your thoughts?
I think now I'm still not entirely sure if I believe in Bigfoot at all, to be completely honest. But
that's fun.
I've been listening to stories about Bigfoot all day, like sightings and stuff. And one common theme that I've heard amongst a lot of these stories on the supernatural aspect is a lot of people have, in the stories that I've heard today, have talked about sometimes Bigfoot will. Some people believe it's possible that it can do an astral projection. So if she had shot an astral projection, that would explain why she thought she saw it and why it didn't leave any traces after she shot it, because maybe when she shot it, it like destroyed the projection or something.
Okay. Interesting. Spider, the 1973 case in Cincinnati, Ohio is very mirrored of many UFO cases. What do you think, or why do you think this UFO would collect these creatures? And do you think these creatures were on board and were dropped off, maybe as a way to gather information about the planet's natural resources? Because if we think about it, a Bigfoot would be highly adept at being able to go into rough terrain, be able to get samples, seedlings, animals, anything else you could really need in that specific region. What do you think would be the cause of that? And what do you think would be the after effect of that?
Well, I'll say first off, um, that when I think about Bigfoot, I usually don't get too close to things that are supernatural. Just like when I think about extraterrestrials, I don't automatically think of that as necessarily supernatural as far as something that can't be explained. And I was thinking about it recently when we got to the topic because I'm pretty well known among our Uncanny family out there for the theory that Bigfoot to me is a descendant of pre-humanoid creatures that were pushed out of their territory as modern man began its ascent back in ancient times. And I think they're able to hide themselves very well. I think they're able to move very well. I think they've watched as humans have invented things, and for whatever reason they haven't decided to invent things of that nature of their own. They've stuck to their wild lifestyle. And I also believe in the ancient astronaut theory. And I think if you believe in ancient astronauts and you believe in Bigfoot, you have to believe that ancient astronauts have had contact with a creature like Bigfoot long before we have as modern man, because there's such a long period of history there. So it stands to reason to me that if ancient astronauts were in fact the equivalent of modern UFOs, that they're still keeping tabs on that form of humanoid. They've watched our history as we've grown, as we've adapted from one hominid species to another, and they're still aware that there's more than one of us out there. For me, Bigfoot is the descendant of what Neanderthal probably was. And the ones that didn't breed into modern humans, because we have evidence of that, the ones that stayed separate and stayed wild, I think whoever these other folks are, who could be aliens, extraterrestrials, what have you, have been still paying attention to that as a subspecies. And maybe they're moving them around, maybe they're testing, maybe they're trying to see if they can get them to evolve forcefully. Almost like in Mass Effect, you have the storyline where some of the more intelligent alien species looked at some of the other species and said, "Oh, we'll uplift you," is what they called it, where they mess with your genetics and they'll boost your intelligence and they'll make you more powerful. And as we know from that series, things backfired, and then they had to go in and make a mess out of it. And not to divert from the point too much, but I think it's explainable in that way without stretching things too much. Without getting into the interdimensional theory, which I'm sure you're going to cover pretty soon here. I'm not going to touch on that just yet. Just strictly speaking of things that could be potentially scientifically explained, that would be the scenario that I would see. As far as the Bigfoot not getting damaged by a shotgun blast, there's a lot of variables there. How far away exactly was it? Was it a well-kept shotgun? Was it one with a high amount of spread or a low amount of spread? There's a lot of things in there that you really can't take at face value and assume that she hit it point blank. It's not like hitting it with a slug. A shotgun has a spread. And if it's not a very good shotgun, it has a pretty wide spread, and all of those could be just little pinpricks there. And something that's been around for a while maybe has thicker skin than we do, and some of that pellet stuff isn't going to take the brunt that a person would, and you're not going to get blood trails, you're not going to get chunks taken out. So there's a lot going on in that area.
Excellent. Thank you both for your input. Let's get into the 1888 meeting between cattle ranchers and Native Americans. This meeting happens, and they all get together, and they talk of three creatures that they dub crazy bears. Now, this could play into the skinwalker aspect that we have discussed previous. This could play into the Wendigo aspect that we discussed previous. This also could play into the Bigfoot
Oh
aspect that we
yeah.
discussed previous. For me, I think because back then things were not edged out to the end of society or civilization, things like this roamed more freely. You didn't have a lot of these creatures um, hiding. They didn't have to. They could move around people because if you tell somebody, you got to have proof. And back then, you didn't have a camera, you didn't have a cell phone. So in that regard, we see that in fact we have always kind of been surrounded by these supernatural entities, whether it be Bigfoot as a supernatural entity or just a ancient ancestor, if you were, of mankind. Now, 1960s, the CIA Project 10073 recorded an interaction with unidentified lights and a probable animal monster. Later, this would go on to be talked about in what we would call as Project Blue Book. Now, I want to jump back to the 1808 meeting. They end up seeing a moon shaped object. This moon shaped object, once again, drops off creatures, drops them off, two biped ape like creatures. They go off in the woods. The Native Americans have seen this and they're retelling this to the cattle ranchers. So, once again, here we have two creatures, Bigfoot esque like creatures. I know Bigfoot's kind of a catch all term. There's many different species of Bigfoot, and a lot of the researchers will tell you that they're not all alike. There's one in Florida that's different from the one on the West Coast, that's different from the one on the East Coast. They have different tendencies, different abilities, as it were. So I want to make sure that to tell you that Bigfoot will be a catch all term for tonight. So don't expect us to break down the specific ones, just bear with us. Now, on the night of July 31st, 1966, four friends are driving around on Presque Isle. Now, this is located in Erie, Pennsylvania. Their car ends up getting stuck in the sand on beach 6 of the Isle, and Gerald LaBelle leaves the group to go call a tow truck. Okay. When the police get to the scene to help, the group tells police something was odd and afoul as they point to a location in the sky, once again, above a wooded area. Mr. Douglas Tibbetts, who was a group member, went with two officers to investigate. As soon as Mr. Tibbetts and the officers are far enough away from the car, the other two passengers, Betty Clem and Anita Hafley, opt to stay. As Tibbetts are going to check out this monster, this creature, these sightings, the car begins to honk with Betty and Anita in it. Well, once they get back, they said that the lady saw a dull black shape, bigger than a man, big head and shoulders, ape like appendages, no hands, no face visible, as it had its back turned. So if somebody turns their back to you, it's kind of hard to see their features. And ends up going off into the bushes. Meanwhile, the UFO that was above the area was described as an angular craft that emitted red and orange lights. Spider, I'll start with you. We'll switch it up a little bit, as it were. You have four people, basically six people, adding the two officers in, that see this UFO. Right, the two ladies only they see the creature or whatever. My question to you is as follows: what is it about these areas or these certain times at night that people usually see UFOs or Bigfoot? I know there are some cases where they were in the middle of the day. But what do you think it is about nighttime? Do you think these creatures are nocturnal?
Potentially, there's a lot of things that are interesting about this story. a lot of these sightings do occur, I think, at night because if you're dealing with intelligent beings, which you assume people who pilot UFOs are going to be intelligent beings, that they would assume, oh, yeah, we're less likely to be noticed when the planet is dark, right? Um, a Bigfoot type creature, having survived so long, will know that sometimes the best way to move around is going to be in the dark, especially if your vision has adapted to that. Now, there's been various stories about Bigfoot, and nothing's been very particularly said about whether they can see in the dark or not, but they are often encountered in at night. The area, Erie, Pennsylvania, is still pretty rural. I've lived out that way for a number of years. I'm pretty familiar with that area of Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of wide areas of forest where you can easily hide for days, weeks on end. There's been fugitives that have hidden in the woods out there sometimes for weeks before they ran out of food and had to come out and get caught. So imagine something that knows how to collect food and can deal with those conditions. And then you throw in the UFO aspect. And the interesting thing about that is they mention an orange light. And orange seems to be a color that comes up a lot as far as UFO and Bigfoot encounters. People see orange orbs, people see orange lights. Orange is a very particular color when it comes to UFO and Bigfoot crossover stories. And I have to kind of wonder why, because different beings will evolve to see different spectrums of light and different shades and things, and orange must be something specific towards that. Maybe it's a part of the spectrum. Maybe Bigfoot sees on a slightly different spectrum without being able to catch one and examine their eyes. Then there's no way that we would have to know. So, but it is an interesting commonality that you find in these stories.
Stephen, question for you. Given that many researchers in the field think that the Bigfoot, and once again, I'm encapsulating all of the Bigfoots into one Bigfoot. Do you think that in most of these cases, Bigfoot knows humanity's cycles, right? They know when they go to bed, they know when they're up, they know when there's human beings near, they can smell them, they have excellent senses that exist outside of our own. Do you think that Bigfoot knows humanity's schedule? That they know that there's less likely a chance for human beings to be out at night as opposed to daytime? And do you think that they plan their hunting and gathering, their building, their travel? Do you think they plan this at times when there are less human beings?
Okay, I think it's complicated because on the one hand, I think they understand it, but I'm not sure if it's actually like a conscious decision or a conscious effort. Like, I don't know if they're just sitting around thinking, oh, we should study what time the humans do their activities so we can avoid them. I think it's more like they just subconsciously notice, oh, hey, it's about this time. The humans are probably asleep. So maybe it would be safer for us to go out and hunt because, I mean, just think about it. If they didn't know our schedule in some sort of way, then how would they be able to avoid us for such a long period of time to where we can't even find their bodies, you know?
And listen, that is an excellent response. Thank you. Let's shift our subject here from UFOs and Bigfoot to missing persons in Bigfoot. Now, if any of you ever watched David Paulides' Missing 411 Hunters, there's some very interesting cases there. But what I want to do is, for the first two cases, it involves children being taken care of, as it were. Our first case comes on January 22nd of 2019. 3-year-old Casey Hathaway disappeared into the woods of eastern North Carolina. Once again, eastern North Carolina, it's going to be a decent region to get lost in, especially if you're a child. He gets lost in Arula County while playing with friends in his grandmother's yard. 2 days later, on Thursday, January 24th, Casey is found a quarter of a mile away, 50 yards deep in the woods. The child's cold, wet, and tangled in thorn bushes. The rescuers who come to get the child wade through waist deep water to save Casey. How did this child survive? Is my question. He told his Aunt Brianna that a bear had helped him. Okay, let's continue. In 1868, in Walhalla, Michigan, another 3-year-old by the name of Katie Flynn goes missing for a day, about a day and a half. She's playing at her father's lumber mill as he's working. Back then, that's what you did. There weren't many babysitters. There weren't many outlets for childcare. So she's playing. She ends up getting kind of lost. She knows the area as a 3-year-old would know, as much as a 3-year-old can know. So he comes back from work, goes to get her, and realizes she's not there. The search starts immediately. As he's looking through her normal trails and places where she would play, he finds 2 sets of tracks. One belonging to his daughter, the other belonging what they would at the time, remember this is the 1800s. There's no Bigfoot expert researchers yet that can tell you that this is a Bigfoot track, this isn't. So the best way to describe it would have been a bear track, or similar to a bear track. This goes on to the next day. The next day, it gets to be afternoon. All of a sudden, they start hearing cries. The father, the search party, go to the source of the cries. As they get there, they hear a large splash in the water like something monstrous fell down upon it. They look at what appeared to be a bear going off back into the woods to sort of get away. Upon questioning the child, she says that a large black creature, came and played with her. And later, as the creature and her were playing, he leaves for a brief spell to go and get berries to bring back to the little girl to help feed her, to sustain her. Later on that evening, the creature makes a bed out of leaves and lays down with the child, using its body to keep the child warm. Now, I don't know about you two, but bears aren't intelligent on that level. They're animals. We're lucky that a bear didn't try to eat the child. And who knows, maybe that did happen. The creature scared her away. I don't know too many creatures that would go out to forage food for a child. Now, there are cases of children being raised by wolves and this, that, and the third. I don't think this is that. But we'll get into this here in a second here. But the fact that it made a bed of leaves and laid down with the child almost to keep it warm was enough for me to show that sign of intelligence that if this thing wanted to, it could have absolutely ate that child. For me, this is one of those times where Bigfoot seems to have that intelligence that we have, right? Of course, there's nurturing animals, but you don't hear about a bear nurturing another human being very often. I'm sure there's an outlier case. There always is an outlier case, so you never can say never on these kinds of things. But for the most part, bears want to be left alone. Okay, maybe, I don't know. I don't have the bear necessities for that answer. Right.
Boom, boom, boom.
So I'll start with Stephen here. Stephen, why do you think in these 2 cases, the children were saved by a Bigfoot entity? Do you think that Bigfoot, once again, this draws into the idea that Bigfoot is intelligent, and I mean intelligent in a human like manner. Do you think that Bigfoot can recognize that this smaller level of human is innocent and needs protecting? Do you think it has a motherly instinct when it comes to children?
Well, the story about let me look real quick. Katie Flynn. That one, I would actually like to mention that that was like the third or fourth story I read about Bigfoot encounters where, like you said, they would take care of the children, and the cops always try to, just brush it off, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, it was just a bear. The bear was trying to, the bear mistook the child for one of its own bear cubs." But I think that's just a little too easy of an explanation, and I think that it was definitely, I think you're right. I don't think it was a bear. And the Bigfoot entity, as we're calling it, I do believe that it is intelligent enough to make a conscious decision to protect these smaller humans. But I don't know if it necessarily realizes that they're innocent, as you say, and maybe it just sees them as not a threat. So it's more so just trying to think, okay, this thing is not a threat, so maybe it's more susceptible to danger because it's not a threat. So let me try to take care of it, and maybe the ones who are a threat will be nicer to me since I took care of its children.
Okay. Okay. Spider, what do you think it is about children? Do you think it's their innocence? Do you think the Bigfoot can tell the difference between a child and, let's say, a teenager? Do you think they might have a, I don't want to say a spectrum vision where they can see an aura or what have you, but do you think they have gone into society from a distance and watched how human beings behave with their children? Do you think that they have that pre knowledge, and when they see a child, they're like, okay, this thing must be protected?
It depends on what you consider the Bigfoot. As there's a big difference between an intelligent animal and a sentient animal. The closest that an animal has come to sentience, which is awareness of what they are and who they are, has been dolphins, as far as and octopus. Octopi are very close to that. Um, but as far as Bigfoot, if we assume that it's an animal, it would be very close to sentience. It'd be super close. If we assume instead that it's like the theory that I subscribe to, where it's a descendant of another hominid creature already, then they already have their own children, and they're old, and not old, but they already have their society basically, even if we don't see it, and they already know how what a younger version of them already looks like and acts like, and they can see that in a similar species. And I think that instinct would kick in. As far as a bear goes, bears are purely very instinctive creatures. Um, Bears are not very close to sentient. They're the smartest bears have been close to dog-like in intelligence. And most of them don't get to that level. Most of them are just like, okay, wake up, find food, go back to sleep. Wake up, find food, go back to sleep. That's a bear for you for the most part. And if it wakes up and it sees something smaller than itself, and depending on the type of bear, it could be like, okay, that's food. It's not gonna be like, oh, I better take care of this because it's a cub, because it's struggling out here. Bears don't really have those kind of thoughts. And it's not anything against them. That's just how they are. That's why it's always so dangerous to be out in the woods if you see a bear, because it's not going to instantly be afraid of you. It's not going to instantly be whatever. It's just going to think, can I eat that? Let's find out. And that's a bear. And because they don't think about things that humans have, like guns or knives or whatever, they just think, oh, there's something that's smaller than me. Can I eat it? Will it be worth the trouble to eat it? And that's it. That's as far as it goes. Whereas if you go with the theory that Bigfoot is more than just an animal, then of course they're going to know, hey, I have my own younger versions at home, or I've seen younger versions of my own species at home. This is somebody that's obviously younger. They're not a threat to me at all. They're out here. What harm is it going to be for me to take care of them? They aren't going to hurt me. They aren't going to do anything to me. And the only other option would be, oh, run away when you see it, because if there's a little one, then big ones might be close by. So I tend to think that that's an illustration of, if it's not a bear, because it really can't be scientifically, then it would be a Bigfoot creature acting on its understanding of how a parent-child relationship is supposed to work.
Excellent. Yeah, I have to agree. Somehow, either they are very similar to us in parenting, or they've seen us parent our young and they sort of mimic that. So it's a very big possibility. Moving away from children and Bigfoot, this last case here was, I think, to me, the icing on the cake that kind of proves something different. I think this shows that there can be violent Bigfoot as well as there can be peaceful Bigfoot. Let's discuss the outdoorsman known as Bart Schleyer, who was born in Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1954. And after he was taken on a hunting trip in Mozambique, of all places, it would form Bart into the person he would become. He'd become an avid and somewhat famous outdoorsman. I didn't know this previously, but yeah, he was pretty famous. He took a hunting trip to the Yukon in September of 2004. This is the last time anybody would ever see Bart alive. Now, for those of you that don't know about the Yukon, it's up in Canada. And it very much is a wilderness for the most part. A lot of hunting expeditions go up there. A lot of people go there just to get away from society. And Bart was no different. Nobody went with Bart. Bart goes by himself. I don't know about you guys, but that's a little terrifying to go into a wilderness by yourself with no one to back you up. I get it. People are adventurous. They want to conquer the unknown. I think that's within all of us. So the only person that sees this man is the charter pilot that took him to this specific location in the Yukon called Reed Lakes. Now, he ends up not getting hold of anybody, talking to anybody. His friends and family start to worry. So they send the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, out to investigate his location. They end up making it to his camp. They find his camp supplies all intact, food intact. He left a radio, bear spray, a knife, and a VHF radio. For those of you that don't know what a VHF radio, it is a radio that you use to talk to other boats. So if you're on a boat, you can radio ahead to boats. You can radio ahead to the Coast Guard, the United States Coast Guard. You can communicate with marinas and bridges. So you have this radio that if you get in a bind, you can do your best to get on the airwaves and talk to the people. And thank you, very high frequency. Thank you for that, Lighthouse. Appreciate it. So the RCMP, they find all of that. Then they go down a ways and they find his boat. They say that he ended up trying to hike to a nearby highway and go back home that way. Well, his friends aren't buying it. This is an experienced outdoorsman. Why would he leave essential things to get into a boat and go further down and investigate without having things like his bear mace or even his knife? So his friend, Dib Williams, and Dib Williams' friend, who was also a pilot, Wayne Curry, go back out to Schleier's camp. On the second day, they end up finding his bow near his boat. As they continue on searching, they find a camouflaged face mask. And so it's got blood on it. They're like, okay, this looks like it could be foul play, but nobody went with Bart. And nobody's foolish enough to go just traipsing around in the Yukon. I don't know any of you that know about the Yukon. I've done some extensive research on the Yukon. I would like to visit there one day. Don't ask why. It's one of those weird, I think, things that all of us men just want to go into a wilderness and see what we can conquer, even though we're all city slickers for the most part. So on October 3rd, because they have found something that has blood on it, now they do a full grid search. Now, for those who don't know what a full grid search is, it's where they take a set number of people and they put them in a pattern and they walk the pattern until they find the missing person, missing child, so on and so forth. This time they end up finding a baseball hat, a balaclava, which covers your face and your head, keeps your head and face warm, and a skull with teeth marks in it. That skull ends up being Bart Schleier. They also end up finding his pants. His pants aren't ripped. There's no blood on the pants. There's no shirt. There's none of his shoes. They don't find any of his clothes, save his pants, the balaclava, and the baseball cap. The baseball cap isn't ripped. It's not torn. His food at camp is still good. The canned food is still good. Everything there isn't a mess except for the tent. The tent was knocked over. They said that could have been the wind or animals. So, in my personal opinion, I think that this is 100% something else. I don't think it's a bear. Once again, a bear attack usually is going to leave a lot of blood. There's going to be slash marks. There's going to be something. And the clothes weren't torn. Nothing was ripped. The fact that he left his bow behind instead of turning around and going back, another reason. You would definitely be taking bear mace, which Lighthouse would make sense if his pants didn't come off. A bear's not going to take your pants off and then attack you, right? There's another story about another hunter that ends up leaving his boots and his clothes folded up nicely on top of a log, and he goes off into the woods and they find him later on. It just doesn't make sense to me. No outdoorsman, a knowledgeable outdoorsman. This man was an expert outdoorsman. That's just not something that's going to happen. Exposure is not going to happen either, because if you're an outdoorsman, and this man is hunted all across the world. Let me also put that in there. He's survived in different climates. A lot of what we have to understand, people that are outdoorsmen, they know their stuff. They know hunting patterns, migration patterns. They know what the weather's going to be like. He had a radio. So for him to venture outside of that radio and not take his bear mace, not take his knife, take his bow and boat, leave his bow and continue on, and then find his pants, his balaclava, and his baseball hat, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me that it would be a bear. But I digress. Spider, your thoughts. Do you think that something was hunting him, a la Predator-esque, and he ran from it? Or do you think that this was an entity that he might have seen in the Yukon that man doesn't see normally because he was so deep in the Yukon? What are your thoughts?
It's interesting because we've discussed on the show many times about people who have had experience with the outdoors and have then had an incident happen where they've gone missing from where they were supposed to be without vital parts of protective clothing or protective tools or things that you would assume that they would take. Even somebody in an emergency might think, oh, I better grab this before I go. But in this case, there's a couple scenarios you have to play through. If you assume, okay, he went out walking and then he got lost, maybe a storm came up or something like that, which they didn't mention, but is a possibility. If he collapsed and a predator found him, either a bear or a wolf or coyote or anything that could come upon you in that area, you would have ripped cloth, you would have torn clothing, you would have more than just tooth marks in the skull. So why were the clothes in relatively pristine condition for the moment? That's a big mystery. It reminds me a little bit of the Dyatlov Pass in Russia, how they had all these things with them and then they ran off into the snow without putting on their shoes, without grabbing anything, and just barely, when you find the bodies are damaged, but the clothes are fine. It tells you that perhaps it wasn't a predator that found them afterwards. Now, and that's really the sticking point, because when they say they found the skull with tooth marks in it, so a predator eventually, or a scavenger, found it. But what happened to the clothes before then? Did he get delirious and start taking clothes off? Did he, there's so many things that are just left up in the air, and you really don't know. And it happens a lot more than you would think in these remote places to people who should know better. And that's where the mystery is. For someone who should know better, how does this happen? And is there an intelligence behind it? Or is it just that common that people go off into the wilderness and then some minor thing happens that sets them off and they go crazy? I don't know. I don't think that's. I know that there's a mental health epidemic that's kind of going across certain countries right now for different reasons. But I don't think somebody experienced in that area so often is going to freak out and just start shedding clothes and shedding their tools and just running off into the wilderness and meeting an untimely end. I think rationally you would find them with a fired gun or a bow that's been damaged because they tried to use it, or some of their clothing is ripped because a creature attacked them and they couldn't fight back. And that's the sticking point. Why is there no damage to these things? Why didn't they take these things? So what happened in there? And in remote areas, it's so easy to erase evidence. I'm not trying to give a primer on people to go take out your enemies out into the woods somewhere, so don't think I'm doing that. But nature will work very quickly to erase clues and to erase evidence, especially if it's in a place that has snow or ice or rain or mud or anything that can easily wash away that stuff. So I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss for what could have happened. And I would say that he was not attacked by an animal while he was still fully clothed and prepared.
I want to say this before I ask Stephen that the question I wanted to ask. You bring up a good point. I just don't think that either Bart was sane, and I don't know if maybe there's a specific frequency that is emitted in these locations that drives people somewhat insane. A certain noise, a certain um, sense of endangerment. I also have to wonder too if being alone for so long causes some form of hallucination, some form of um, feeling, and that's right, have some defense and have an ability to start a fire. And like I said, Bart had all of these things at his disposal. Stephen, how do you think a experienced outdoorsman that knows a place like the Yukon pretty well, how do you think a person like that succumbs to something like this? And let me say this too, they never found the rest of the body. They found the head. They found the skull. They never found the rest of the body. So whatever killed him could have drug him off, could have just left him, and like Spider said, nature reclaims. But how do you think, Stephen, an experienced outdoorsman gets caught with his pants down?
Well, this is going to sound a bit out there, obviously. But what if it wasn't Bigfoot or a bear or an animal? What if it was a Wendigo? Because I've heard some stories that Wendigos, when you hear the howling outside of your tent or whatever, and you go out, and sometimes the Wendigos make people go crazy, and sometimes people get hot and start taking off their clothes, and they run out there to try to chase after the Wendigo, and they just like lose their minds before they get attacked by the Wendigo. So that's like the only thing I can think of. Or maybe if it was some sort of kelpie or a siren, sometimes they can make people, do strange things. Or maybe it was a violent mermaid trying to lure someone out to the sea or the ocean. But I don't know. I'm just trying to make stuff up here because I'm also at a loss. I don't know either.
The interesting thing you bring up in Wendigo, I feel like if it were a Wendigo or were something of Native American folklore, there would be slashes.
Yeah, definitely.
Because a Wendigo is basically a cannibal.
Yes.
You would find bite marks. Now, there's the teeth marks on the head, but like Spider said, that could have been something that came along after and ate from that body. However, I still have to lean on this being something otherworldly. Bigfoot possibility. He went into the nest, or he went into an area where they were migrating to continue on their path. And him being an outdoorsman, you want to bag something like this, if nothing else but for scientific research. And he came upon something that was a bit bigger than him. Maybe he shot this thing with an arrow. We don't know this. There's a lot of points to this that we do not fully understand because we weren't there. But once again, an experienced outdoorsman, missing children being taken care of, UFOs, orbs, lights. This is all part and parcel to what I believe to be the supernatural Bigfoot. I think there's something more to this than just an ancient ancestor, as people like to believe, which I do not buy that theory whatsoever. I don't think we're related to that at all. If that's the case, I think it's a separate hominoid entity and it's not related to our DNA. But if we ever find one and can DNA map, then we'll see if we are in fact distant relatives. But for me, I'm going to buy into this a little bit more because of the cases that I'm coming across. I'm not gathering this evidence willy-nilly, mind you. I'm gathering this from cases, and I think that as we progress in our research of Bigfoot, we have to start taking into account things like missing persons, things like UFOs, things like strange anomalies happening around Bigfoot-centered events. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight to our new season of This Uncanny Earth. Give a big thank you to my co-hosts Spider and Steven. Steven, you are on the block for next week. What are you going to be talking about to the fine people out there?
So next week we will be talking about cults. One particular cult I've been looking into already is the Mooney cult. That one
Okay.
sounds like it might be pretty interesting.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we look forward to that next week. Stephen will be our moderator. I will be taking the back seat, and he will be asking myself and Spider questions.
Tough
And
questions.
tough questions, questions that make you go like this, whew, like you're under interrogation by the
Sweating.
CIA. You get sweats from it. So I want to thank all of you for coming out. Thank you to Scruffy for the raid. Thank you to Zeus, Gnarly, James, all of our awesome people that always show up for us. Also, next week we will have a surprise for you at the end of the show. So you're not going to want to miss that. But as always, why be boring when you can be uncanny? We will see all of you amazing folks next Thursday for another episode. This time, Steven's bringing us cults. You guys aren't going to want to miss it.